Imagine you were a member of the French resistance in occupied Normandy, May 1944. For 4 years you have lived under Nazi rule, waiting for liberation, wondering if the Allies will ever come. You have heard rumors, whispers of an invasion. But when? Where exactly? How will you know when to act? Then, one morning, you see a cartoon. Not an obvious propaganda piece, but an innocent-looking comic strip that appears in an underground newspaper passed through your resistance network. The cartoon shows familiar characters, simple drawings, nothing remarkable at first glance. But you were trained to look closer, and when you do, you notice something impossible to ignore. The character's position in the frame, the specific objects in the background, the date written on a calendar barely visible in one panel, the number of buttons on a coat. These are not random artistic choices. They are signals, messages, coordinates. You realize with a shock that runs through your entire body, this cartoon is telling you exactly when and where the invasion will happen, and it is happening soon. Very soon. This is not fiction. This is the extraordinary true story of how Allied intelligence used coded cartoons to coordinate the largest amphibious invasion in history. How simple drawings carried secrets that could not be risked in radio transmissions. How artists became cryptographers and comic strips became operational orders that helped launch D-Day. Welcome to Cipher Tales, where we decode the hidden intersections of World War II propaganda and espionage. Today, we are revealing how a coded cartoon helped launch the invasion that changed the course of the war and liberated Europe from Nazi tyranny. The invasion begins with a drawing. Let us decode it. Act 1. The D-Day Coordination Challenge. The magnitude of Operation Overlord. Before we can understand how cartoons helped coordinate D-Day, we must grasp the extraordinary complexity of Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy. D-Day, June 6, 1944, involved landing over 150,000 Allied troops on 5 beaches along an 80-kilometer stretch of the Normandy coast. This required assembling nearly 7,000 naval vessels, transporting thousands of vehicles and tons of supplies, and coordinating air support involving more than 11,000 aircraft. But the invasion itself was only part of the challenge. Success depended on thousands of French resistance fighters conducting coordinated sabotage operations across occupied France. Railway lines needed to be cut at precise moments to prevent German reinforcements from reaching Normandy. Communications cables had to be severed to disrupt German command and control. German convoys needed to be ambushed. Strategic bridges had to be destroyed or defended, depending on whether they would help or hinder the invasion. All of this coordination required communication between Allied command in Britain and resistance networks scattered across occupied France. This was one of the greatest logistical and communications challenges in military history. The communication problem. Communicating with resistance networks in occupied France was extraordinarily dangerous and technically challenging. Multiple methods existed, each with significant limitations. Radio communication was the most direct method. The SBE had trained radio operators who parachuted into France and established clandestine wireless stations. These operators could receive and transmit messages from and to Britain. But radio was extremely risky. German direction-finding equipment could triangulate radio transmissions within minutes. Operators faced constant danger of detection, with many captured, tortured, and executed. Additionally, radio messages required encoding and decoding using codebooks or memorized ciphers, creating opportunities for errors and compromises. The BBC broadcast coded messages during its French language programs. These messages appeared to be personal notices or cryptic announcements, but actually carried operational significance for resistance groups who knew the codes. A seemingly innocent phrase like, "The dice are on the table," might signal that a supply drop would occur at a specific location. However, BBC messages were limited in the detail they could convey. They could signal go or no-go for planned operations, but they could not communicate complex tactical information, coordinates, or detailed instructions. They were blunt instruments when what was needed was precision. Couriers physically carried messages between Britain and France, crossing the English Channel by boat or parachuting in. But courier missions were slow, dependent on weather and opportunity, and vulnerable to interception. A captured courier could compromise entire networks. What Allied intelligence needed was a communication method that could reach multiple resistance networks simultaneously, convey detailed tactical information, including maps and coordinates, survive German interception without compromising security, and appear innocuous if discovered. The solution involved combining art, cryptography, and the distribution networks of underground resistance newspapers. The Underground Press Network. Across occupied France, resistance groups published and distributed clandestine newspapers. These papers provided accurate news about the war, countered German propaganda, maintained French morale, and helped organize resistance activities. Publishing these papers was incredibly dangerous. Writers, printers, and distributors faced execution if caught. But the networks persisted, with papers appearing regularly throughout the occupation. Some had circulations in the tens of thousands, passed hand to hand through networks of sympathizers. Allied intelligence recognized that these underground papers offered a potential communication channel. If coded messages could be embedded in content that appeared to be ordinary resistance journalism or entertainment, those messages could reach thousands of resistance members across France simultaneously. The challenge was developing a coding system sophisticated enough to convey complex tactical information, but subtle enough to avoid detection by German censors who monitored underground publications when they could seize them. The answer was visual steganography embedded in cartoons and illustrations. Act 2. The Method: Hiding Orders in Ink. Why cartoons? Cartoons offered several advantages as vehicles for hidden communications. First, they were expected content in resistance newspapers. Political cartoons mocking Hitler and the occupation, comic strips providing humor and escapism, editorial illustrations making points about resistance, all were common in underground publications. Including cartoons raised no suspicions. Second, cartoons provided visual complexity that could hide multiple layers of coded information. A single illustration might contain dozens of elements: character positions, background objects, specific symbols, text integrated into the image, each potentially carrying meaning. Cartoons might also include small, inconspicuous details that look like artists' choices, but were actually coded information. Cartoons could be memorable and could be described verbally. A resistance member who saw a coded cartoon could describe it to others who might not have seen the original, allowing information to spread through word of mouth beyond the paper's immediate circulation. Cartoons could convey spatial information like maps and locations more effectively than text codes. A drawing could show positions, directions, and relationships that would require lengthy textual descriptions. Allied cryptographers working with the Special Operations Executive and the Office of Strategic Services developed several coding systems for embedding information in cartoon images. Grid positioning system. The most fundamental technique divided cartoon panels into invisible grids. Artists trained in the system knew that characters' positions within these grids encoded specific information. A 9-square grid might map to letters or numbers. A character standing in the upper left square might represent A or 1. A character in the center might represent E or 5. Multiple characters in a single panel could spell out words or number sequences.
For D-Day coordination, these grids could encode dates, times, and coordinate references. A resistance member trained to read the grid would mentally overlay it on the cartoon and decode the positions into actionable intelligence. Object symbolism. Specific objects appearing in cartoons carried predetermined meanings established through training or previous communications. A clock showing a particular time might indicate the hour of an operation. A calendar with a date circled could signal when to act. Specific vehicles, a truck, a bicycle, a train, might indicate what type of target to attack. The number of visible windows in a building, the quantity of trees in a background, the number of buttons on a character's coat, all could carry numerical data. Color and shading codes. In cartoons that used color or varied shading, these elements could encode additional information. Different colors might represent different types of operations. Shading intensity could indicate priority levels or risk assessments. Directional indicators. The direction characters faced, the way roads curved in backgrounds, the orientation of objects, these could provide directional information crucial for navigation or indicating target locations. Text integration. Some coding systems embedded messages in text that appeared in cartoons. Speech bubbles might contain seemingly normal dialogue, but specific words, when read in particular patterns or with certain letters emphasized, spelled out hidden messages. Sequential coding across multiple panels. Multi-panel comic strips could encode information across the sequence. Reading the panels in order and applying the encoding system to each might reveal a complete message that no single panel contained. Authentication markers. To prevent German intelligence from creating fake coded cartoons that would mislead resistance networks, Allied encoders included authentication elements. These might be specific artistic techniques, particular character designs, or subtle markers that confirmed the cartoon came from Allied intelligence rather than enemy deception operations. The artists and cryptographers. Creating coded cartoons required unprecedented collaboration between artists and intelligence officers. The artists were often professional cartoonists who had fled occupied territories or were recruited specifically for their skills. They needed artistic talent to create compelling cartoons that would appear natural and unremarkable. But they also needed to understand the encoding systems well enough to embed information precisely while maintaining artistic coherence. Intelligence officers provided the tactical information that needed to be communicated. For D-Day coordination, this included specific dates and times for operations, target locations identified by coordinates or landmark references, types of sabotage operations to conduct, and authentication codes that confirmed message legitimacy. Cryptographers designed the encoding systems, ensured security against German code breaking, created training materials for resistance members who would decode the cartoons, and analyzed feedback from field operations to refine the systems. This collaboration worked in secure facilities in Britain, where operational security was paramount. Only cleared personnel knew the full scope of the operation. Many resistance members who received and acted on coded cartoons never knew the complete system, understanding only their specific decoding keys. Training the decoders. French resistance members needed training to decode cartoon messages. This training occurred through multiple channels. Some resistance leaders were brought to Britain for direct training. During these sessions, they learned the encoding systems, practiced decoding sample cartoons, and received one-time pads or memorized keys that would allow them to decode future messages. For resistance members who could not be extracted to Britain, training occurred in occupied France through SOE agents who parachuted in. These agents carried instructions disguised as innocuous documents or memorized as seemingly random information. They taught trusted resistance members the decoding systems in clandestine meetings. Some training materials were embedded in earlier coded cartoons themselves. A sequence of cartoons might introduce the encoding system gradually, with each cartoon containing both its operational message and subtle teaching about how to read the next level of encoding complexity. The training emphasized security. Decoders needed to memorize systems and destroy any written materials. They learned to read cartoons quickly and discreetly, not drawing attention by studying them too carefully in public settings. And they understood that captured resistance members under interrogation might be forced to reveal decoding methods. So compartmentalization and need-to-know principles governed who learned which aspects of the system. Act 3. The D-Day Cartoons, Coordinating Invasion. The Pre-Invasion Communication Campaign. In the months before D-Day, coded cartoons in underground newspapers began preparing resistance networks for the coming invasion. These early cartoons conveyed general readiness messages. They signaled that major operations were approaching. They indicated which types of sabotage activities should be prepared. They identified general areas where resistance activity would be most critical. The cartoons also served to test and refine the communication system. Allied intelligence monitored whether resistance groups responded appropriately to the coded messages. When responses suggested misunderstandings, the encoding systems were adjusted to improve clarity. This testing phase was crucial. D-Day would require precise coordination of thousands of resistance fighters across France. The communication system had to work flawlessly. There would be no opportunity for clarification once the invasion began. The April and May coordination messages. As D-Day approached, the coded cartoons became more specific and more frequent. Resistance newspapers published issues with multiple cartoons, each encoding different operational information. Target identification cartoons showed maps of France with certain regions or features emphasized. These encoded which railway lines, bridges, communications cables, and supply routes should be targeted. Resistance sabotage teams studied these cartoons to understand their specific assignments. Timing sequence cartoons conveyed the complicated schedule of operations. Certain actions needed to occur days before the invasion. Others needed to wait until the invasion was underway. Still others should happen only in response to specific German movements. The cartoons encoded this temporal information through date references, clock times, and sequential indicators. Supply drop notification cartoons alerted resistance groups to incoming supply deliveries. These cartoons indicated when and where Allied aircraft would drop weapons, explosives, and equipment that resistance fighters would need for D-Day operations. The encoded coordinates allowed resistance reception committees to be in the right locations at the right times. Communication protocol cartoons reminded resistance members how to interpret subsequent messages. They reinforced decoding techniques, updated authentication markers, and ensured everyone was using the current version of the encoding system. The final messages, May 1944. In late May 1944, as the invasion date approached, coded cartoons conveyed the most sensitive and crucial information. The date cartoon appeared in underground newspapers circulated in the first week of June. This cartoon, analyzed properly by trained resistance members, encoded the invasion date, June 5th, later postponed to June 6th due to weather. The cartoon showed a scene that appeared to be generic resistance imagery. Fighters gathering, weapons being prepared, hopeful citizens looking toward the horizon. But embedded in the image were multiple encoded references to 6 and June. The character positions spelled numbers. A calendar, partially visible in the background, showed early June. Clock faces indicated 6 o'clock. Trees in the background, when counted, numbered 6. To German intelligence officers who might have captured and studied the cartoon, these elements would appear to be artistic choices or coincidences. But to trained resistance decoders who knew what to look for and how to apply their keys, the message was unmistakable. The invasion will occur on June 6th. The location confirmation cartoon refined intelligence about where the invasion would land. Allied deception operations had spread misinformation suggesting the invasion might target Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. Resistance groups needed to know the actual target so they could conduct sabotage in the right areas. This cartoon used directional and geographic encoding to indicate Normandy. The shapes of coastlines and background imagery, the positioning of characters suggesting westward movement, references to Norman cultural symbols, all subtly pointed to the actual invasion site, while maintaining plausible deniability if the cartoon was intercepted.
The Go Signal cartoon appeared in papers distributed in the days immediately before the invasion. This cartoon used the simplest possible encoding to convey the clearest possible message: execute planned operations now. Resistance members who had been preparing sabotage missions for weeks or months knew that when they saw this particular cartoon, it was time to act. Within hours of this cartoon's distribution, resistance fighters across France began cutting railway lines, severing communications cables, and conducting the coordinated sabotage operations that would delay German reinforcements from reaching the Normandy beaches. The backup systems. Allied intelligence knew that not all coded cartoons would reach all intended recipients. German crackdowns, distribution network compromises, or simple bad luck might prevent some resistance groups from receiving the crucial messages. Therefore, the cartoon communications operated alongside other systems. The BBC broadcast coded messages that paralleled the information in cartoons. Radio operators transmitted confirmation signals. Couriers carried physical instructions as backup. But the cartoons reached audiences and conveyed details that other methods could not match. They were the primary system, with other methods serving as supplements and confirmations. German counterintelligence and the cartoons. Did German intelligence ever suspect that resistance cartoons contained coded messages? The evidence is ambiguous. German counterintelligence certainly monitored underground newspapers when they could capture copies. They analyzed content for intelligence value, looking for clues about resistance organization and activities. Some German analysts may have suspected that coded communications were embedded in innocuous content. But if they suspected cartoons specifically, they apparently never broke the encoding systems or recognized the D-Day coordination messages for what they were. Several factors protected the cartoon codes. The systems were complex and required specific keys to decode. Without access to those keys, determining whether patterns in cartoons were meaningful or coincidental was extremely difficult. German analysts looking at the cartoons saw what appeared to be typical resistance propaganda artwork, crude drawings mocking the occupation and encouraging French patriotism. Additionally, Allied deception operations created noise in the intelligence environment. Germans were bombarded with false information from multiple sources, making it difficult to distinguish genuine intelligence from deception. Even if they suspected some cartoons contained codes, determining which ones and what they meant was nearly impossible. The compartmentalization of the resistance also protected the system. Captured resistance members could only reveal what they personally knew. A member who had memorized one decoding key for their specific region could not compromise the entire system even under interrogation. Act 4. D-Day, the cartoon's impact. The resistance mobilization. When the coded cartoons signaled that D-Day was imminent, resistance networks across France began in coordinated action. The scale and coordination of this mobilization was unprecedented. In Normandy and surrounding regions, resistance fighters conducted approximately 1,000 sabotage operations in the 48 hours around D-Day. Railway lines were cut in over 500 locations. Telegraph and telephone cables were severed throughout northern France. German convoys were ambushed on roads leading toward the invasion beaches. The French resistance did not work alone. Allied Special Forces teams, including members of the Special Air Service and OSS operatives, coordinated with resistance groups. But the resistance provided local knowledge, numerical strength, and the ability to operate across vast areas simultaneously. The coded cartoons had told resistance fighters what to do, where to do it, and when. This coordination multiplied the effectiveness of resistance operations far beyond what would have been possible with uncoordinated guerrilla activities. Delaying German response. One of the critical factors in D-Day's success was the delay in German reinforcements reaching Normandy. Several factors contributed to this delay, including Allied air superiority and German confusion as to whether Normandy was the main invasion or a diversion. But resistance sabotage, coordinated through coded communications including the cartoons, played a crucial role. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, stationed in southern France, was ordered to move to Normandy immediately after the invasion began. Under normal circumstances, the division could have reached Normandy in days. Instead, it took over 2 weeks because of railway disruptions, bridge destructions, and constant harassment by resistance fighters who knew, thanks to the coded cartoons and other intelligence, that delaying this division was a critical objective. This delay meant that Allied forces had time to establish and consolidate the Normandy beachhead before facing armored counterattacks. The difference between immediate and delayed German armored response may have meant the difference between success and failure for the invasion. Other German units experienced similar delays. Communications disruptions slowed orders from reaching frontline units. Convoys took circuitous routes to avoid resistance ambushes, wasting time and fuel. Officers hesitated to commit reserves because they could not get clear intelligence about the tactical situation due to communication sabotage. All of this chaos, while caused by many factors, was significantly amplified by the coordinated resistance actions that the coded cartoons had helped arrange. The intelligence harvest. The coded cartoon system served not only as a communication method from Britain to France, but also as an intelligence-gathering tool in the opposite direction. Resistance members who received and acted on coded cartoon messages sometimes sent confirmation back through radio operators or couriers. These confirmations told Allied intelligence which messages had been received, which operations had been executed, and what results had been achieved. This feedback allowed real-time assessment of how effective the coordination was and whether adjustments needed to be made in subsequent communications. Additionally, the pattern of German responses to resistance sabotage provided intelligence about German defensive dispositions, reinforcement routes, and command priorities. When Germans responded strongly to sabotage in certain areas and less strongly in others, this revealed where they considered strategic priorities to be. Allied intelligence analyzed these German responses to refine their understanding of German defensive strategy, information that informed tactical decisions in the days and weeks after D-Day. Measuring success. How much did the coded cartoons actually contribute to D-Day's success? This question is difficult to answer definitively because their impact was indirect and operated alongside many other factors. Post-war assessments by Allied intelligence and military historians generally credit the French resistance with significant contributions to D-Day's success. The coordinated sabotage operations delayed German reinforcements, disrupted communications, and created widespread confusion behind German lines. The coded cartoons were one part of the communication system that enabled this coordination. They were not the only method. BBC broadcasts, radio communications, and courier messages all played roles, but they were an important component that allowed detailed tactical information to reach thousands of resistance fighters across France. One way to assess their value is to ask, what, without the coded cartoons, could the same level of coordination have been achieved? The answer appears to be no. Radio communications alone could not have reached the necessary number of people with sufficient detail. BBC broadcasts lacked the precision to convey complex tactical information. Couriers could not have distributed detailed instructions to dispersed networks in the necessary time frame. But the cartoons filled a specific need in the communication architecture that supported D-Day. They were not the only critical component, but they were a necessary one.
Act 5. The Legacy, from Cartoons to Modern Covert Communication, the End of the Cartoon Codes. After D-Day, the strategic situation changed rapidly. As Allied forces liberated French territory, resistance networks came out of the shadows and integrated with regular military forces. The need for covert communications diminished as overt coordination became possible. The coded cartoon system continued in some forms through the summer of 1944, supporting operations in regions still under German occupation. But as liberation progressed, the system became obsolete. By the end of 1944, the underground newspapers that had distributed coded cartoons either ceased publication because they were no longer needed or transformed into regular newspapers serving liberated communities. The cartoons that had carried secret messages became historical artifacts, their importance recognized only by those who had known how to read them. Cold War evolution. The techniques pioneered in the coded cartoon system evolved during the Cold War. Intelligence services recognized the value of hiding communications in apparently innocuous visual materials. Both Western and Soviet intelligence services used visual steganography during the Cold War. Messages were hidden in magazine photographs, in classified advertisements with specific visual elements, and in artistic materials that appeared innocent but contained coded information for agents operating undercover. The digital age provided new opportunities for visual steganography. Images could be digitally altered to hide information in ways invisible to human observers, but readable by computers with decryption keys. The fundamental principle remained the same: hide secret messages in plain sight within materials that would not attract suspicion. Modern applications. Today's intelligence and security services still use visual steganography for covert communications. The technology has become far more sophisticated, but the underlying concepts trace back to operations like the World War II coded cartoons. Modern steganographic techniques can hide entire files within digital images by altering pixel values in ways imperceptible to human observers, but readable by computers with decryption keys. Encrypted messages can be embedded in photographs posted on social media, allowing covert communications in public forums. Coded visual signals can coordinate activities of operatives who never directly communicate. Beyond intelligence operations, visual steganography has found applications in digital watermarking for copyright protection, secure communications in authoritarian environments, and privacy protection technologies. The World War II cartoon codes pioneered many of the principles underlying these modern applications. The use of visual complexity to hide information, the importance of training recipients to recognize and decode messages, the value of authentication systems to prevent false messages, and the power of hiding communications in materials whose presence is expected and unremarkable.
the historical recognition. For decades after World War II, the coded cartoon operation remained largely unknown. Many of the participants were bound by secrecy agreements. Documents remained classified. The few published accounts of resistance communications mentioned the cartoons only briefly or not at all. Gradual declassification from the 1970s onward revealed more details. Memoirs by SOE officers, academic research into resistance history, and increased access to wartime records brought the story to light. Today, historians recognize the coded cartoons as an innovative and effective element of the D-Day coordination effort. Museums and historical societies in France and Britain occasionally display examples of these cartoons, explaining their hidden significance to audiences who see the images without immediately recognizing the secrets they contain. Some of the artists who created coded cartoons later had successful careers in illustration and cartooning. A few publicly discussed their wartime work after declassification allowed it. Others took their secrets to their graves, their crucial contributions to D-Day known only to their immediate intelligence colleagues. Conclusion: the secret in the ink. Decoding the full operation. We return to our opening scene, a French resistance member seeing a cartoon and recognizing the hidden message that the invasion is coming. Now we understand the full story. That cartoon was the visible tip of an enormous intelligence operation involving cryptographers designing encoding systems, artists embedding messages in illustrations, underground networks distributing the materials, and thousands of resistance fighters trained to decode and act on the hidden intelligence. The cartoons appeared simple, even crude, but they carried information that could not be safely transmitted by radio, that could not be distributed by courier networks, that could not be broadcast openly. It contained dates, locations, target priorities, and coordination signals that thousands of people needed to know simultaneously. And when those people decoded the message and acted on it, their coordinated efforts contributed to the success of the largest amphibious invasion in history, and the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany in Western Europe. The Cipher Tales perspective. At Cipher Tales, we decode these forgotten operations where propaganda and espionage merged into tools that changed history. The coded D-Day cartoons exemplify this integration perfectly. They appeared to be resistance propaganda, simple drawings encouraging patriotism and mocking the occupation, but they were actually sophisticated intelligence communications conveying operational orders to an army of resistance fighters. The cartoons existed in multiple contexts simultaneously. As propaganda, they boosted morale and maintained resistance spirit. As art, they provided entertainment and cultural expression. As intelligence tools, they coordinated military operations. Each function reinforced the others, creating something more powerful than any single purpose could have achieved. The story of these cartoons remind us that the most important messages are often hidden in plain sight, that art and intelligence can merge in service of liberty, and that the humblest materials can serve the highest purposes when necessity demands it. In our next upload on Cipher Tales, we are decoding the forged documents that fooled Nazi bureaucracy. You will discover how Allied intelligence created papers so perfect they passed through German checkpoints and saved thousands of lives. If this deep dive into the coded World War II cartoon that helped launch D-Day fascinated you, please subscribe to Cipher Tales for more decoded mysteries from the hidden history of World War II. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. Like this video if you found it revealing and thought-provoking. Every like helps us reach more people who appreciate the complex hidden dimensions of history. Comment below and tell us, were you surprised that simple cartoons could convey such complex military intelligence? Can you think of modern examples of hidden communications in everyday media? What other World War II propaganda and espionage intersections should we decode next? Share this video with anyone fascinated by D-Day history, intelligence operations, or the creative ways that necessity drives innovation in wartime. Until then, remember, the most powerful weapons are sometimes drawn in ink on paper, hiding in plain sight, waiting for those who know how to read them. This has been Cipher Tales. Keep questioning, keep decoding, keep discovering the secrets that changed history.